Great. So, welcome everyone to this information session for the Community Knowledge Matters Network. We are Highlands and Islands Network for community-led research. So this session is designed to give an overview of what the network is about, a kind of flavor of different ways that you can interact with the network, and how you can get involved. So we always start our sessions with an overview of our network values. These values were co-produced by members of our network together at the start of the program that we had together. And we came up together with these 5 values of equity, inclusivity, collaboration, respect, and integrity. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what they mean specifically for the network in a little bit, but just always like to kind of start the space by giving a reminder of what those values are, both in terms of the overall, but also in terms of how we, I suppose, intend to interact with each other in these sessions as well. And something we also do in our sessions is we have something that we call a jargon jar. If Natalia, you've got a chance to pop that into the chat, that would be great. This is really a chance to, I guess, kind of query if there's any words that we're using throughout this session or throughout our time together as a network that maybe you don't understand. Maybe someone is using it in a way that you wouldn't normally use it, and you would, like to kind of discuss it, then that's a chance to do so. So in terms of how that relates to this space today, so just a quick space setting. Some of you will be familiar with this already. So we, of course, want to be respectful to ourselves and to each other. So do feel free to step away if you need to at any point. And we have various ways of making this accessible. There's auto captioning available. We've already mentioned the jargon jar, and do let us know if we can help in any other ways. It's an open session, so as I said already, please ask questions throughout the session if you have any, or in the chat, and Natalia or myself can try and address them. We won't be having breakout rooms today, but we will have some time for discussion at the end. So as always, just kind of be aware of others in the room and making sure everyone has a chance to speak. And likewise, if you maybe are someone who doesn't speak quite as much usually, or doesn't always volunteer yourself, do feel free. This is a kind of a space where we encourage any kind of interaction. And we are recording today's presentation, just the presentation parts of it, and the Padlets will be shared within the network. That's kind of a flavor of the kind of way that we usually start our sessions, just to kind of orientate ourselves. So an overview of what we plan to discuss today. So we will be having a little quick introduction sort of exercise, something that we call the community check-in. And so we'll do that together as a group, and to give you a flavour of how we usually like to do it. We'll talk about what the network is, the kind of aims behind it, and kind of what we're trying to do. And we'll also have Q&A and open discussions at the end as well. So before we do the actual community check-in, I thought I would just give you a flavour of what to expect. So this is something that we do on something called Mentimeter. And so you'll come up with 2 questions. So the first question is exploring the kind of hats that you're coming in with. And this is something that we do in a nod to the way people often work within the Highlands and Islands and in many other places, where they acknowledging people often have lots of different perspectives and different hats, do many different jobs at once. But also, especially with regards to this network, is thinking about how to avoid the binaries between, for example, community members and researchers, acknowledging that we can all be community members in our own rights and researchers in our own rights, and that we may, come in with different amounts of that experience or lean on those different perspectives at different points. So it's kind of a nod to that. And you'll see a graph that then kind of indicates, maybe to what extent you're coming in as a community member at any one point, or a decision maker. So hopefully a useful reflection exercise for everyone in the room, but also a chance for us, I guess, to kind of nod or have an idea of who else is here and thinking about the kind of different dynamics. And the second question will be about what communities we're representing. So as you can see from this previous example, that can include a variety of different interpretations of communities. So that could be physical communities. We've had people from Shawlands, from Shetland, and very specific geographical communities. It could be communities of identity as well as communities of experience. So again, just a kind of a way of thinking about who's in the network and who's in the room. So yeah, so to give an overview of community knowledge matters. The network generally aims to connect people. So it's great to have met some of you in this space already now. And we have various ways of kind of having these networking opportunities through our online events and meetings such as this, but also we have an online platform so that people can get to know each other outside of meetings as well, which is nice. We then also have quite a focus on building capacity, and so sharing opportunities for different ways to get involved in community-led research, including resources, news, opportunities, training. And then I suppose our kind of wider aim, which kind of underpins all of this, is thinking about how we build collective advocacy together to try and bring about more equitable community-led research. And to kind of try and inform practice and policy led by community-led research and the experience of people with lived experience and from grassroots communities. Welcome to anyone who's just joining. By the way, we are just giving a bit of an overview of the network through our information session, and we'll have a chance to chat and introduce ourselves at the end as well. So just quick introductions from some of us in the Community Knowledge Matters team. A couple of us are here in the call today, but I thought I'd also just give a kind of brief overview, including Lewis, who is not with us today, but so Lewis is the director and founder of Science Ceilidh, which, as you'll soon find out, is facilitating this network and a big part of shaping it. But Lewis kind of comes with, as we all do, as I've said already, with many hats. And Lewis also works as the development coordinator for the Ideas Fund. So I'll also mention what the Ideas Fund is afterwards. But so he kind of comes in, kind of shaping the overall kind of direction of this program. And then I am the network coordinator, and I am kind of project managing this network and developing it alongside Lewis. And then we've also just recently been joined by Natalia Rodriguez, who we're delighted to have in our team as well, who will be involved a little bit more working closely with some of the communities and thinking about how we can kind of communicate better and kind of make it more accessible as a network. I don't know whether, Natalia, you want to say hello yourself at this point and give yourself a quick introduction.
Hi, yes, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and maybe you will hear from me in Community Lab that already Lauren is going to introduce in a couple of minutes, but I'm in charge of sharing opportunities that are useful for you. If you're a researcher or if you are a practitioner or a community member, we'll try to search opportunities from funding, events, and others that are useful for you. So just reach out and let me know if you need anything network related. Thank you.
Amazing. Lovely to have you with us, Natalia, today and in general. We'll go on to the next one. So things can get a little bit confusing. With any kind of project, there's always lots of different players and different kind of organizations involved in something. So I thought I'd give a very brief overview of all the different organizations and partners that are involved with this network. Don't feel you need to remember and understand all of these, but just in case it's useful. So this whole program of work that we're doing is funded by the Welcome Fund. And so they have been funding what's called the Ideas Fund program that's been running for the last few years. Basically funding communities to lead on research around mental health and well-being. And then out of that has come this infrastructure network, which we'll be discussing in a little bit as well. So the Ideas Fund is this particular program that Welcome have been funding. And then the British Science Association is a charity that is delivering the Ideas Fund program. And they've also been working with local partners on the ground. And one of them is the social enterprise Science Ceilidh. So I work for Science Ceilidh, as do Natalia and some of our other colleagues who are on the call today here, Alexia and Katie. And so we are involved in a variety of ways in thinking about how to kind of provide more support to communities and thinking about kind of knowledge democracy alongside cultural democracy. And so Science Ceilidh was working very closely with the Ideas Fund for the Highlands and Islands aspect of their funding programme. And then we have then been running this infrastructure network that is Community Knowledge Matters. So hopefully after I've explained a little bit more about all these things, that will become a bit clearer, but just thought it'd be useful to kind of give a quick who's who. So first, to just say a little bit more about Science Ceilidh. So as I say, we're an independent organisation supporting everyone's creativity, curiosity, and well-being. And we have that, I suppose, across a range of programs that broadly cover cultural and knowledge democracy, as I said already. So to give you a flavour of some of those different projects, we have quite a lot of kind of hands-on workshops that we do, especially around youth work and kind of delivering workshops and creating resources. We do quite a lot with practitioners and a variety of networks and developing kind of training programs and developing capacity. One of the other programs that is doing that specifically with youth workers and looking a bit more at STEM skills and how STEM skills can be used within youth work is the Curiosity in Action program. Developed and delivered by my colleague Katie. And then, of course, we have the arm that I'm more involved in, looking at community-led research and I suppose the kind of knowledge democracy side of things as well. And so that's where this kind of fits into. And so then to say a little bit more about the Ideas Fund and I suppose where this bit of the work came from. So the Ideas Fund, as I say, which was funded by Wellcome, was really interested in what would happen if you kind of change the power dynamic of a funding process around research. So the kind of experiment was, what would happen if you fund the communities to lead on the research rather than just the researchers in more academic institutions or in a kind of professional context? And how would that kind of change the nature of the research and the kind of power dynamics between them? So the Ideas Fund was funding a series of community groups, grassroots community organisations across 4 different areas across the UK. And one of those areas was the Highlands of Scotland. And as you can see on that top picture, we funded over 20 different community organisations across the region. And over the last few years, they have been delivering some really powerful research around mental health and well-being. With the program being that they would be matched with a researcher, and the idea being that the knowledge flows very much both ways between the community groups and the researchers, but very much led by and kind of designed by the communities themselves. And the idea behind this was kind of trying to, I suppose, avoid what can sometimes be the kind of extractive nature of research, where research institutions or kind of universities would define what's important to look at. And in this way, instead, it would be giving that power, if you like, to the communities to shape that research themselves. And then the other program that is kind of quite similar to this that we've also been involved in is a similar idea, this time funded by a different funder, by UK Research and Innovation. And we've also been delivering that in collaboration with the British Science Association, which you'll remember from a previous slide. And this one was instead looking at climate change. So a very similar idea, this time with slightly smaller pots of money, but again with the grant going to the community groups directly, and we would then match them with a researcher who would support them to lead on research around climate change on topics that matter to them as a community. And so that funding program has just come to an end. We've been funding over 15 groups across the Highlands and Islands, again, and taken a lot of the learning that's come from that, which has been really, really rich and rewarding. So, as I say, we've had these different programs, the Ideas Fund program especially, and the other one where we've been directly funding communities to lead on research. But as I say, a huge amount of learning has come from both of those programs and from that process. And so what we were interested in was thinking, how can we take some of that learning and how can we think about how we can support a system to better enable this community-led research across the board? And some of the learning that we've noticed is identifying that there's actually quite a lot of common barriers. There's a lot of common challenges for communities in leading research, but also in having that research kind of listened to or making an impact, especially with policymakers, for example, or wider decision makers. And so because there were so many of these common kind of infrastructural barriers, as we're calling them, we thought, well, what if there wasn't funding anymore to fund communities directly to lead on research? How can we kind of change the system so that others can do so in the future? So that's kind of where the impetus came for this work as an infrastructure network, as it were. And as I say before, there's already this work is being done in 3 other areas across the UK. So also in Hull, in Northwest Northern Ireland, and in Oldham. And so there have been these 4 kind of infrastructure areas, and we've each developed our own networks to kind of address these questions, as it were. So our infrastructure network was formed about 18 months ago. And collectively, we decided on a new name. So this became the Community Knowledge Matters Network. And our kind of 4 main aims were to build a network so that we could connect together and learn from each other as peers, but also specifically to build capacity on the ground so that, as we say, even without funding, there would be more support and more tools to enable communities to lead on research themselves. Kind of creating an evidence kind of base of why it's important for communities to lead on research, and also what can happen, in terms of kind of impact and policy change when community knowledge is listened to better. And so then, of course, that built into the kind of wider aim of the advocacy work around system change in general. So as we develop the network, it is, a member-led network, and at the spirit of everything that we do is co-production. And so we are really keen for our network members to kind of develop the aims and beliefs and values and how this network would exist from the start. So we started with people who were already involved with the Ideas Fund in some way, or who we knew were interested in this work, and together with those kind of initial members, we developed a series of beliefs and values. So you'll see them on this slide here. There's quite a lot of text, but I'll just kind of go through them quite quickly to give an overview of what we mean by these different words that I'd shared on the screen earlier. So the first one, equity, is a really, really important part of this work, especially, as I say, we're interested in how we can make community-led research more equitable. And so what we mean by that is recognizing, again, as I was saying, the kind of systemic issues and some of the barriers and the infrastructural barriers that exist for people. And so really thinking about what those needs are, and taking that kind of intersectional approach to understand the complexity of those structural inequalities. So that's very much something that we always try and think about with this work. Inclusivity was a very obvious one as well, and so very kind of actively trying to think about how we reach out to those who are not as commonly involved in this kind of work, or who don't have as much access to these kind of spaces. And so we've been working quite proactively in trying to reach out to diverse communities, and within our network also trying to think, again, quite proactively about what kind of access needs or support needs might make it possible for people to get involved. So that might be support with childcare. We know that across the Highlands and Islands, childcare is often quite a huge barrier for participation, or might be thinking about travel. Again, across the Highlands and Islands, there's quite a lot of kind of logistical barriers, as well as other kind of access needs as well. And again, it's something that we're always wanting to learn from our members and think about what that would mean for them in a meaningful way. As I mentioned before, respect is really important, and we have a kind of reflective learning process as we go along. You'll probably see that the network has already changed quite a lot, and that's partly come from kind of really trying to listen and interrogate ourselves, but also kind of being respectful of the different needs as they emerge within the group. Collaboration, again, that kind of spirit of co-production, and so very much throughout the network, but also in kind of the different ways that we engage with others, really trying to put an emphasis on collaboration and sharing the power and the platforms that we have. We especially know there's a lot of other people doing this work alongside us. And there's other similar networks, there's other similar programs that are looking at the role of co-production or participatory research, and many others who've been kind of pioneering in this work a long time before us. So we're very kind of keen to kind of partner and work with those people as much as we can, rather than kind of thinking about reinventing the wheel, and using the kind of the kind of power that we have within this network and with the funding program that we have to support what else is going on as well. And then integrity, which is always a hard one to kind of explain, I suppose, but thinking about kind of accountability and thinking about what we can achieve, and sort of, I suppose, having that expectation management. One of these big questions that I think comes with research in general, especially when it's community-led research, is thinking about the impact that can come with research, and recognizing that change is often slow. And so thinking about how, we can kind of take accountability for what is possible, and kind of recognizing what tools we have at our disposal, rather than kind of balancing the kind of long-term goal alongside what's kind of possible at the time. So as with anything, it's a very reflective process. And so these kind of networks and beliefs and values are something that we kind of keep coming back to. And indeed, after our last gathering, there are some suggestions about other aspects that we can bring into this, including thinking about how we balance kind of collective needs versus individual needs. And so that's something that we'll be coming back to as we go along. So to give an overview about what the network does, that's kind of the background to why the network exists. But so we generally function through, as I say, it's member-led, so through collective decision-making. And so we're made up with our network members, who can be ordinary network members as individuals with lived experience, grassroots community organizations, members of organizations who are working maybe in the third sector or service providers, and then as well also decision makers and people working a bit more in policy or more nationally. And so those network members have opportunities to shape the network directly through our regular communities of practice, which I'll come to in a little bit, and just generally through kind of opportunities for feedback and guidance throughout the program. We then also have a steering group, which is a set of stakeholders, if you like, or partner organizations who have been particularly involved in the network from the beginning, and who have, I suppose, kind of a diversity of different perspectives on this area. So we have people, again, from grassroots organizations who are in the steering group, people working in policy, people working in university contexts. So we get a real kind of diversity of different opinions. So we have steering group meetings every few months, and that kind of just sets the tone and kind of guides us. So again, a kind of accountability, if you like. And then I suppose we've got a kind of set of external stakeholders who maybe are not as involved in the network in particular, but who are in regular conversation with about these issues. So that might include people from the Scottish Government, for example, who we're in quite kind of constant conversation with, other networks, kind of sister networks, and other kind of wider national bodies that have some kind of role in this landscape. So then in terms of the ways to interact with the network and the kind of points of contact for network members, we have our kind of bread and butter, if you like, is our monthly communities of practice. And so they are a chance for anyone to come and get involved, meet other people, but also kind of give some feedback and kind of take part in activities and reflection exercises. We have conversation stations, which are more like kind of community spotlights and a chance to, again, create that evidence building base and get a flavour of what community-led research can actually look like. And then, as I mentioned as well, we have our online spaces that anyone can interact with throughout the time, and then in-person events, as we had an in-person gathering last in the summer, in June in Inverness. So the next layer, if you like, we kind of get more and more granular, is our working groups. So our working groups are made up of members of the network, but also some wider stakeholders who maybe have a specific interest in that area, and are keen to kind of help shape the network in that particular way. So we started out last year with 2 working groups, an ethics working group and a public health and social care working group. And the idea of these were, I suppose, generally a kind of reflection space. So we would have kind of wide reflection questions about what some of the wider barriers were around questions of ethics or within public health and social care that may prevent communities from leading more on research or perhaps influencing policy with their evidence. And also thinking about opportunities. So thinking about kind of other players within this area, other people that we can perhaps partner with or support or interact with. So they're kind of, I suppose, a bit like a steering group, but kind of having this wider oversight of these key questions. And then this year, we are going to be starting another working group looking at the intersections between climate change and mental health and well-being. And this is partly as a result of demand from network members. So we've often had a lot of conversations around the role of climate change and how it affects mental health within our spaces, but also the other network that I had mentioned before that had been looking specifically at climate change, community-led research around climate change, is a kind of way for us to kind of bring some of that learning in as well. So that will be starting up very soon. And then we have a number of particular projects that are kind of, I suppose, if you like, outcomes of those working groups. So the kind of doing arm of those discussions. So one of them is something that we're calling the participatory ethics toolkit, which I'll mention a little bit more in a bit, and also a co-priority survey that has largely come out of this public health and social care working group as well. And then in phase 2, so in this kind of next year, looking ahead, we're also going to be working a lot more on the kind of training and resources element of what we're doing and engaging more directly with policymakers as well. So again, that's a kind of big overview of the different kind of aspects of our work. So just to quickly give a little, again, I did the kind of who's who of the different people involved. One of the confusing aspects of this network is that almost everything we do has the word community in it, which definitely doesn't help for distinguishing different things. So again, just to kind of quickly give a differentiation. So Community Knowledge Matters is obviously the name of our network and the kind of wider program. Our communities of practice are these kind of regular sessions for members and kind of peer networking and peer learning. Community spotlights are where we give over the space, if you like, to some of those community groups to share their own experience of community-led research. And then Community Lab is the name of our online platform. So hopefully they'll be easier to kind of distinguish when you know a bit more about them all. But don't worry if you get confused, because everyone does. So as a quick overview of what to expect with our communities of practice, we do have a page on our website which gives a little bit of a kind of breakdown of what you might expect in a typical community of practice. But generally the idea is to meet other people and have kind of networking opportunities and learn from each other. We often, as I say, will have a kind of group activity or a kind of reflection exercise. And one of the exercises that we do is something called the living glossary. And so that's really a bit, as we were kind of saying at the beginning, thinking about the jargon jar, is thinking very specifically about the language that we're using, especially around community-led research, and what that language and how we use those words differently, what that can tell us about the power dynamics behind community-led research. So as much as anything, it's thinking about how people use those words differently, and yeah, what that can kind of tell us about the kind of state of play, as it were. So it's very much, we call it a living glossary because it's very much not a a kind of dictionary definition of any of these words, but more thinking about what we can learn from how people use them. So that's something that, again, we'll have on our website. And so you can kind of engage with that in the meetings, but also regularly throughout the program as well. And then at the end of the communities of practice, a really important part is it's also an opportunity to come with your own questions or issues that you'd like to discuss with peers. And so we'll have a kind of dedicated space for discussing those topics, going into breakout rooms or having a joint discussion. And that might be about things such as specific methods for doing community-led research, perhaps a question about intellectual property, who owns the data for a particular research project? Would it be the community? Would it be researchers or the university? Sometimes kind of more thematic issues about climate change. So they're really a kind of free-for-all space and a nice chance to kind of learn from each other. So we have them regularly, and you'll usually get a direct calendar invite and notice about it in our newsletters. And then our conversation stations, as I say, is a kind of deep dive and a chance to hear from community-led community members themselves about their experience of leading on research. And this is more of a chance to focus on the kind of practicalities, thinking about some of the methods used, and kind of dig deeper into what that actually could look like in different circumstances. So we have had one sort of official one back in May, and that the recording of that is on our website. So that can be a resource that others can come to before. And so that was with Ron Coleman from Deepness Dementia in the Western Isles. And this coming Tuesday, so you don't have long to wait, is with Kerry Mackay from the Grab Trust. And so Kerry was actually one of the recipients of the climate change grant. And so she'll be speaking about her experience of creating an evidence base for reducing single-use plastics through their project in Oban. So do come along to that, and it's a really great chance to, kind of, I suppose, demystify what it looks like and ask questions and be inspired, I suppose, around what you can do yourselves about community-led research. So Community Lab, as I say, is the other kind of way to interact more regularly. And it's kind of a bit like Facebook or any kind of online platform. It's free to join. And you don't need to kind of set up any kind of account. You can do so just through a quick form. And our lovely Natalia also posts regular opportunities on there as well. So that's opportunities around funding for community-led research. It might be opportunities to get involved in research yourself or other kind of events and resources. But crucially, you're also able to post your own questions or opportunities as well. So you'll see that some of our other members have been putting up things about their own projects or things that they're involved in. And it's kind of a way that you can engage with each other without needing us there as well. I'll just quickly stop sharing and show you what it looks like. This is an example of some of the posts that we've had up on Community Lab already. So Natalia has posted up this here, and then you can comment and get in touch with each other and kind of engage as well. You can also message each other. There's a kind of chat function. So it's a nice way of connecting without necessarily having to share your own contact details. So it's a useful space for that. And just as a reminder how to sign up for it. So on our website, you can click on the Join Our Forum and it will automatically take you to the usual place for signing up to the network. But if you've already signed up to the network, you can click on this link here and it will take you straight to Community Lab as well. So I've already mentioned our working groups. We generally meet every 6 weeks online, and if you're interested, then you can get in touch with us and find out more about them. And then just the last thing I wanted to quickly touch on was a few more details about those particular projects that we've been developing as part of this network that again kind of came out of those different working groups. So the first one is the co-priority survey. And so this was something that we developed, again, with the spirit of co-production alongside or with a working group made up of people from grassroots communities across the Highlands and Islands with a range of experience of being involved in research or kind of peer community-led research beforehand. And we also did this in collaboration with the University of the Highlands and Islands. So the survey that we developed was hosted online on using their survey software, but it was very much the entire thing was developed collaboratively with this working group of people. And so for us, a key part of this was really ensuring accessibility of the survey and making sure that it was relevant to the communities that we were targeting or interested in hearing from. And overall, the idea was to look at, it was kind of meta in a way, thinking about how people in rural areas would like to see research about mental health done that's perhaps different to in non-rural areas. And so we developed this system, this survey together. We were using what was called the Rural Urban Island Framework that was developed with the Scottish Rural College. And so you'll see this map here kind of indicated the kind of different ways we were thinking about rural. So we had a distinction between those living in island communities and those living in mainland communities. Which, yeah, kind of produce another interesting element into thinking about what we mean by rural. And so in general, the survey was looking at attitudes towards rural mental health research, also people's own experience and involvement in research about mental health in rural areas, some of the kind of practicalities. So again, what barriers and or motivations people found and what they might find useful to get involved in the future. So whether that was specific training or other kind of tools to engagement. And then I suppose the last bit was thinking about what people's priorities were around mental health research in rural areas. So if there were any kind of topics that they feel are most important to be looked at. So generally, we were looking with the survey to produce a guide for future mental health research, but to specifically try and influence future researchers, but also future funders and governments to listening to the kind of evidence that was coming out from our respondents. And hoping to kind of give voice and again, that kind of sense of collective advocacy for doing mental health research in rural areas in a more equitable and kind of fairer and meaningful way for those in those communities. So with this survey, our intended outcomes are to develop a better understanding about the priorities on the ground, kind of shaped by them as well. And that the evidence from this would help shape the direction of our own program for community knowledge matters. So especially around capacity building ideas and what kind of training and support is required is something that we're going to be looking at very closely as we develop our own program. But again, as I say, trying to inform wider policy and thinking about how data can be used differently. So as is one of the things I mentioned before around intellectual property, we've got this big question about who owns the research. And so we're very keen to have this, the data, once it's been anonymized, made available for other people to use for their own purposes. So we hope to have that on our own website so that other people can use it maybe for their own funding applications or their own research projects as well. So again, hoping to kind of share that knowledge more widely. And then, of course, it's been a very reflective process for ourselves in thinking about how research can be done collaboratively in this way. So yeah, we were very keen on making it accessible through a Gaelic translation. We had an easy read version, a video explainer, and so it was a really interesting process in thinking about what an accessible survey might look like. And we were delighted to have had an incredibly high response rate. So we had, in the end, 171 respondents, or no, 151, sorry, respondents, which was well above what we were anticipating, and actually double the amount that the Scottish Government received for their own consultation around a similar question. So a really positive reaction to hopefully our process being a bit more engaging and meaningful for people. So where we are now with the co-priority survey is we are, again, with the same working group co-analysing the findings because we had so many, 151, not just many responses, but very deep and rich responses with a lot of open answer questions. As you can see here, people have written a lot of feedback. So we're very kind of thoroughly going through that together as a group and co-analysing it and thinking about how we can make sense of the responses and the data. We'll be then shaping that into a kind of collective response, which will be creating into a series of different briefing papers for different audiences. So some specifically targeting policymakers and decision makers. And again, our conversations with the Scottish Government will inform how we can use this data to help shape policy differently. There'll be some aimed at universities and researchers, and of course, a lot of resources that we're planning to feed back to communities. We then also hope to have a series of kind of policy labs and also kind of community workshops to kind of make sense of our responses and think about how we can build on some of this research as well. So that's what we'll be kind of creating together as a working group in terms of sharing the evidence. But we'll also be writing quite a bit about our process, again, as our kind of perpetually reflective exercise. So we have just had a proposal for a book chapter accepted, where we'll be writing about our process and kind of what that meant for us. And we'll also be putting out a series of blogs. So there's going to be a huge amount of work happening over the next 18 months around this survey. So you'll definitely need to watch this space. And then the final thing before I allow you guys a chance to ask any questions of your own is our participatory ethics toolkit. So this was, again, very much what came out of the ethics working group. And I guess it started with a question of what would it look like to explore ethics from a rights-based perspective. So thinking very much about not just who gets to be involved in research itself, but who gets to be involved in setting the terms of engagement for that research. So who can shape what the ethics process would look like. Typically, you would have a researcher come to you with maybe a consent form, for example, and that they would have designed that ethics process through their university. And only once that ethics process has gone through, then communities might be able to get involved. And so instead, we're interested in thinking about how we can encourage communities to help shape what that process would look like, but also feel informed to kind of agree or disagree about how they'd like to be involved. So by kind of informing them further to maybe say, oh yes, I'd love to get involved in that research, but we don't feel comfortable doing it in this way, or this is what we would kind of demand, or what our terms are. So to kind of answer all these kind of thorny questions, we decided to develop a game. So this game was kind of informed by some workshops we did with young people and peer researchers across Shetland, as it happens. And so through these conversations, we then designed a kind of game that would prompt some of these conversations around what an ethics process would look like, or what it might want to look like in those specific contexts. And so this game that we developed is very much designed as a kind of pre-engagement tool, both for researchers. So if a researcher is interested in doing a project with communities, for example, it might be something that they want to do with the groups before they start shaping their ethics process with the university, but also as a kind of game or a process that community groups can do on their own back to just think about how they might want to engage with future research in general, or to kind of address different ethical concerns. So the board game kind of looks at these different aspects of context, thinking about what consent might mean in different ways, thinking about respect, thinking about different modes of recognition, and thinking about what happens with that, they would want to happen with that knowledge or that data afterwards. So it has a kind of series of prompt questions of things like, is it important that people are paid for their participation in this research? Should people be anonymous? Are there other ways of making them feel recognized or valued in the research process? What would you do if someone withdraws their consent after the process is finished, and what would you do with that data? So kind of some quite typical questions, but also some questions that maybe are a little bit more context specific for those different groups. So that's a board game that we're still developing and will be bringing out next year. So again, look out for more updates on this as well. That is the end of my very long whistle-stop tour of Community Knowledge Matters. So we'll have a chance to ask any questions at the moment, but otherwise, please get in touch. And if you'd like to join the network, then you can do so through the QR codes on the screen there. Thanks very much.